you are a professor of Africana legal studies. What does that even mean? And so I was reading this piece today in the Washington Post, and it talked about the 1700 congressmen that owned Black people in the
Ah,
1800s. And it starts March 7th, 1850, as Senator Daniel Webster delivered a famous speech about slavery. 45 of the 106 congressmen listening owned human beings. Those slaveholders included Jefferson Davis, Andrew Johnson, and Sam Houston. From the founding of the United States until long after the Civil War, hundreds of the elected leaders writing the nation's laws were current or former owners of people. I don't like slave owners because they're
yeah.
not slaves, they're human beings. More than 1,700 people who served in the United States Congress in the 18th, 19th, and even 20th centuries owned human beings at some point in their lives, according to a Washington Post investigation of censuses and other historical records. The country is still grappling with the legacy of their embrace of slavery, and the link between race and political power in early America echoes in complicated ways from the racial inequities that persist to this day to the polarizing fights over voting rights and the way history is taught in school.
Hmm.
So I'm asking this question because voting rights, Joe Biden's about to deliver this speech. Joe Madison, day 67, is on a hunger strike for voting rights. But I feel like we're fighting not a losing battle, but I don't know, we might need to fight differently because the history is what it is. Angie, so when you teach, Angie Porter, this, how much of this history comes into teaching law to your law
Oh
students?
man. Wow. Thank you so much for this question because next Tuesday, which is the first day of this class, this is the first time we're doing this. I'm going to tell the class, you are the inaugural Africana Legal Studies class in the world that I'm aware of. Nobody else is framing it in the way we're going to frame it together in this class. I'm going to have to look at that article because that's directly on point with what we're going to be talking about. It's the recognition, Africana Legal Studies, that there are really two systems of governance in our historical experience as African people in the Western Hemisphere and beyond. One experience of governance is law, what you just described. And the law that we live under is really Western, and it has been defined by people interested in the institution of enslavement and preserving that. I mean, slave owners, for lack of a better term, slave holders are the ones who wrote law in this country as we know it. Then look at our world. And this really dovetails with what you and Dr. Carr talk about every week, social structure and governance. So if we're looking at social structure, which is who African people are to others, that's law. But what is governance? Who are African people to each other? What are the institutions we develop for ourselves? Just because law was happening over here doesn't mean there was a void in Africa. We had governance systems in Africa as well before any interaction with Europe. And enslaved Africans brought their entire culture to the Western Hemisphere, including the way that they resolved disputes, the way that they addressed wrongdoing, the way that they kept promises. So these indigenous African governance systems is what is really at the heart of Africana Legal Studies. We're talking about what we're calling protocol. That's the governance, protocol. So Africana, protocol, and law are these two systems that clashed, and protocol didn't just disappear. Our ancestors continued to form and engage in community and solve disputes and solve problems in the ways that they knew. And so we're asking questions about that. How did law interrupt protocol? How did it change protocol? What would have happened if protocol would not have been encumbered by enslavement and the operation of law? How would our governance system look? What rules would it have? So those are all big questions, but that's what we're going to be tackling this semester and beyond. And Yeah, I would love to continue talking about that with
Oh man,
you as
I would love
well.
you to come. Definitely, you have an open seat here, and if you are in Georgetown Law School, take this class with Angie Porter, Professor Angie Porter, and when next this summer when she heads over to American U, if you're in law school there, take this class because I think there's a shift happening, and I don't know if these guilty verdicts, whether we're talking about the taser case we just did, or Chauvin, or the other three officers that will be on trial soon for killing their part in the killing of George
Yes.
Floyd, to this conviction of these three. This is this a shift? Are we seeing a shift with predominantly white juries? Are we seeing a shift in American legal culture?
I think we are, but I'm not sure it's a permanent shift because, as you mentioned earlier, we're in this whole fight about education. We're in the culture wars. We got people talking about critical race theory. They don't even know what critical race theory is. They just don't want white children to feel bad in school by talking about the truth of what happened. That really puts us in danger. I think that really makes the shift, if that's what's happening, precarious. And this is why the first couple of lessons in my class are purely about enslavement. We have to get on the same page because we've all been taught differently about enslavement. I think back to my high school, middle school years, and I went to these like progressive schools, but enslavement was still briefly mentioned on the margins of textbooks. So the first thing we had to do is really confront the truth of the history and the nuance of it so that we can
Center
understand.
enslavement as the foundational economic root of America, not
Yeah,
a fringe.
it's the crash
happy-
moment,
right,
right?
right.
And we don't ignore it. We do center it in a way, but we're also centering what you center every week, which is the African antecedents to all of this, the continuity, the culture that was brought. I mean, enslaved Africans are not just empty vessels in the Middle Passage who somebody flashes a neuralizer and they forget everything. These are real human beings with culture and they bring it with them. And anybody who's an immigrant today knows that. Anybody who's first generation born in the US but has immigrant parents knows that firsthand. You know about the culture. You're being taught by your parents. You don't forget it and you pass it on. So anyway, yeah, those are major recognitions we have to make, but that's not being done in schools